Offensive coordinator Shane Waldron made some subtle changes to the Chicago Bears offense in Week 4 that went a long way towards putting 24 points on the Los Angeles Rams.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On the show today, we look at what the Chicago Bears did differently against the Rams this week that helped make so much come together in the right ways. We've had a chance to go through the All-22 film, go back through and see what was working well, what was going differently for the Bears, and how that started to unlock more of the running game, easier passing for Caleb Williams, and even we'll wrap up with some different things on defense as well that we've seen Matt Eberflus and company working towards, and kind of get a better sense of, particularly when this comes to this Bears pass rush, how that group has been able to find so much success this season from a lot of different places over the course of the year. But having the opportunity now to go back through the film from Week 4 against the Rams, we were able to check some of the things we had talked about immediately after the game and try and confirm, okay, like, does the film match the eye test? And are there some numbers to back up what we were seeing on Sunday? And certainly when it comes to the ground game, we all saw how much better it was. But we were trying to get to the bottom a little bit of why all of a sudden DeAndre Swift had such a big game. And something that stood out right away when we were watching it live was some of the variety in run concepts and the run schemes and play calling that Shane Waldron called. And I think it matched up on tape what we saw with the eye test in terms of how different the Bears' rushing attack was. But the numbers in terms of the success in the variety of run concepts don't quite perfectly align. So I'll show you what we mean here. So first of all, when you look at how the Bears ran the ball this week against the Rams compared to previous weeks, as we suspected with the eye test, they ran a lot more what we call gap scheme runs. These are considered, your man blocking. It's duo man blocking up the middle where you got double teams right at the point of attack and you're just pushing guys backwards, north-south running there. Or it's power, where you're pulling a guard or a tackle from the backside to the front side to overload, or counter, where you're pulling two blockers from the backside to the front side. I mean, the Bears ran a noticeable number more of gap this week against the Rams than they had in the previous few weeks, and as a result, then they ran a lot fewer zone running plays as a proportion of how much they were running the ball. Over the first couple of weeks of the season, they'd ran a handful of gap scheme runs here and there, but it was mostly zone. Weeks 1 and 2 for sure. Week 3, they got a little closer to 50-50. It was more like 60-40 zone with a little bit of gap, a little more gap in there. But this week, Week 4, was the first game all season where the Bears ran more of those gap scheme power type of runs than the zone stretch types of runs. It was very clearly an emphasis for Waldron, at least in this matchup, to say, let's get a little bit more vertical, let's get a little bit more downhill, let's run a little more down their throats as opposed to a little bit more side to side and cutting upfield. This is a little bit more like, hey, get ahead of steam and just hit the hole as fast as you can, as opposed to trying to read the play and then make your cutback somewhere within there. The interesting thing about this to me is that, yes, for sure, the numbers confirm the tape, which confirm the eye test of yes, more gap scheme running. But the Bears' longest runs in this game still came on the zone plays. And that's what's fascinating for me. And I don't have a perfect answer as to why that the fact that they ran more gap but still then had more success on the zone plays they did run. I mean, certainly they were averaging a good yards per carry on the gap, but like the big breakaway 36-yard, 39-yard touchdown, whatever it was from DeAndre Swift, split inside zone play, one of their staple runs, it just worked better for him. And I think part of it is that, when the line is running those gap scheme plays, maybe they can build a little bit more confidence, a little more aggression in just being able to attack and not so much flow horizontally as they're trying to attack. They can just get downhill. So then maybe, once they go back to his own play, does it cue them to be a little bit more aggressive? Does it get them going downhill a little bit more? Or is this just kind of a small sample size random chance thing where, okay, they ran a lot more gap this week, but the zones just happen to work better because the Rams aren't a very good defense. I mean, I don't have the perfect explanation as to why more gap runs meant better zone runs, but that's definitely how the numbers panned out, and you can certainly see it on tape in terms of what the Bears were able to do there. I do think going to more gap was more effective, or was an effective step towards opening things up offensively. And maybe part of this is that when they were running zone such a high percentage of the time earlier in this season, does the defense start to sort of key in on that and say, okay, every time a lot of the time they're going to the run, we know they're trying to flow, so we can flow with them and be ready to then wait for the cut and go attack them. Whereas like when they're mixing it up with a lot more gap in there and even more gap than zone, the defense then can't flow with it as quickly or easily, can't anticipate that, okay, as Caleb turns the handoff, I can step with the back here. Like, no, I got to read the guards now. I got to read different things. Like it is more for the defense to have to read and adjust to there. I think that's probably part of it, but I think part of it is just, hey, the line is getting better. They're playing together more cohesively. They have more experience together. Swift ran better. The defense was worse. And I think it's sort of a combination of all of these things. One of the other factors, though, beyond just the schemes that they were calling, was also the personnel that were on the field for those plays. One of the other main changes that we saw Shane Waldron do differently this week on offense was involving the tight ends a lot more and the wide receivers a bit less. When you look at how the Bears used their offensive personnel this week compared to previous weeks, this week was the lowest amount of 11 personnel that the Bears used. 11 personnel is one running back, one tight end. That's the 11. And then 3 wide receivers. That was still 56% of the Bears' offense, but that was the lowest compared to 72% in week 1. The amount of 11 personnel the Bears have used each week has slowly declined. And as a result, they've gone to more 2 tight end sets, and especially this week against the Rams, the most 3 tight end sets we've seen all season, with Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett, and Mercedes Lewis all on the field together. So offensively, the Bears got heavier in their personnel, plus the plays where your backup center, Doug Kramer, is lining up at fullback. They didn't spread out as much. Still primarily spreading out, but spreading out less comparatively than previous weeks. That way they get more blockers on the field in the running game, and then also you can work some play action off of that. And certainly when you're passing out of those, you get base defense a little bit more against your heavier personnel, so then you get better matchups in the passing game, and you can open some things up that way. But it's clear that Shane Waldron is adjusting here and trying different things and seeing what's working and what's not working, and getting then different mixes of play calling in the running game involved with gap and zone scheme runs, and also different mixes of personnel on the field. We saw the most snaps Mercedes Lewis has played this season, at least as a percentage of the total snaps. He was on the field quite a bit more in this game than any other game up to this point. A heavy dosage of Cole Kmet, like usual, medium dose of Gerald Everett, I would say, but that combined to be a lot more tight end usage overall in this game than in previous weeks. So I think it's good signs of the Bears offensive coordinator, trying to get creative here, trying to just use different things involved in this offense to help get things going. It wasn't just the tight ends in the running game, though. It was also the tight ends in the passing game, particularly, and not just the tight ends, I should say, but also the running backs as well, staying in pass protection a bit more in this game to help Caleb Williams try and have a little bit more time. So we'll kind of look at what the role of more tight ends had in the passing game in addition to this running game next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, you can start this season off with a big return on FanDuel because they're going to give you $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So you can bet $5 on anything. Certainly, you've got the Bears game this week coming up against the Carolina Panthers. If you want to look ahead, the Bears are 3.5-point home favorites in that game. The money line is Bears minus 196 straight up. And the over-under is set at 42.5. So $5 at any of those, or the baseball playoffs, WNBA playoffs, the combat sports, golf, tennis, soccer, you name it. They have it all. You're going to get $200 guaranteed with any $5 bet. To claim your bonus bets, just go to FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. The use of the tight ends, I think, was big in opening up this running game a little bit more, especially as they mixed up the schemes there. But I think it also helped the passing game quite a bit. It gave Caleb Williams some different options and stressed the defense in different ways, and then also helped give Caleb Williams more time to work in this game. Not that he was holding onto the ball for a crazy amount of time, but when the Rams would blitz, for example, the Bears had more personnel in to help pick it up so that those plays wouldn't get disrupted so quickly right in his face and force him to have to throw it even quicker or escape the pocket right away or make some play. Like if you glance at the box score from this game, the Bears only completed 3 passes to a tight end, and it was Cole Kmet all 3 times for 34 yards. One of them was a beautiful ball right up the middle of the field, right over the end of the outstretched linebacker. But overall, like in terms of the actual receiving game, not a super, super high impact tight ends in the passing game there. But I think their presence, what was so critical. I mean, again, we look back at just how often, we're talking 41% of the time the Bears had either 2 or 3 tight ends on the field. I suppose you had to include the Doug Kramer plays when he's in the backfield. Those are both runs though, so they don't really add up to the passing game. But really, like over 40% of the time, the Bears had multiple tight ends on the field, whether they were running or passing. You saw when Mercedes Lewis was out there, it was almost always as a blocker. I think he only ran 1 route as a pass receiver in this entire game. But Gerald Everett, was out there quite a bit doing both. It's worth mentioning they're not just using Gerald Everett purely as a receiver, or certainly not purely as a blocker given his skill set, but he was on the field for 20 plays. He ran 7 routes, 1 pass blocking snap, and 12 run blocking snaps there. But I think when you've got the tight ends on the field and the Bears went under center a lot more with some of those plays, it opens up things more in the play action game. It feels more like you're selling the play action when you've got tight ends on the field. They're anticipating run with 12 and 13 personnel on the field. So I think the Bears didn't run a crazy amount of play action in this game. I still, if we're thinking like things I still want to see Shane Waldron continue to do more play action. It was 6 dropbacks out of Caleb's 26 passing dropbacks were play action plays. He was 4 for 6 for 48 yards. That's an 8 yards per attempt and 12 yards per completion on those plays. Like generally, play action is a good thing for every quarterback, and I would like to see more of that, but baby steps here. We're not going to expect Shane Waldron to have gone from the most hated offensive coordinator in Chicago right now to, the hero of the offense just yet. But I like the way that more tight ends being involved in the passing game, stretches defenses more underneath and horizontal to try and draw them in a little bit closer to try and then open some things up over the top of them downfield. Again, I think that's how Cole Kmet wins up the seam on that play, or even, on plays like the DJ Moore touchdown where you get him lined up with a linebacker one-on-one in the slot because you've got tight ends split out wide and more in the slot. So then the defense has to sort of stretch out that way, and you can get better mismatches across the field with those tight ends out there. But then also, we've seen a trend over the course of the last couple of games of Shane Waldron keeping tight ends and running backs in to block more, to give the Bears 6 and 7 man protections a little bit more often so that Caleb doesn't just have the 5 blockers in front of him trying to pick everything up. It's not a drastic change from week to week, but it's subtle enough, and I think it's hard to accurately, or it's hard to sort of measure or capture in one perfect metric. There's not a readily available metric of like percentage of plays with 6 or 7 blockers on the field that I can find and pull for you to talk about on this podcast. But like you look at how the Bears are using their tight ends, like the percentage of passing plays on the field where they're pass blocking for Cole Kmet, that went from 8% in week 2 to 10% in week 3 to 11% in week 4. Like they're using him slowly more and more as a pass blocker instead of purely as a receiver. Mercedes Lewis wasn't used in pass protection at all his first 2 games of the season, but against the Rams here, he was in on 5 passing plays and blocked on 4 of them. He ran 1 route and blocked 4 other times. And it doesn't sound like a lot when we're talking about, okay, it was 5 pass blocking snaps for Cole Kmet, 4 for Mercedes Lewis. DeAndre Swift had 2 or 3. I don't remember the exact number, but also a higher percentage for him this week than in previous weeks. Like, all these guys are getting bumped up a little bit. And when you take Kmet's blocking a little bit more, Lewis is blocking a little bit more, Swift is blocking a little bit more, Everett's blocking a little bit, Roschon Johnson's blocking a little bit. That's 5 different guys all contributing as extra blockers on different passing situations. And when you only end up passing, I think it was 26 dropbacks total for Caleb Williams, when you have Kmet doing it like 5 times and Mercedes Lewis doing it 4 times and DeAndre Swift doing it twice, I think, and then Everett doing it once and Roschon Johnson doing it once, like, all of a sudden you're getting close to or half of Caleb Williams passing plays having extra blockers in there. All of a sudden, like, that's a bigger impact than 10% here or 11% there. But, like, there's a lot, and that's not, I don't have the exact number of Caleb's passing plays that had extra blockers. Again, I don't have that metric. But, like, when you start to add up how often guys were doing that, and as a percentage of the number of plays they were on the field for passing plays, how often they were used as blockers, you can see the increase there where you're getting extra help in the pocket. Again, it's hard to capture in one settled number, or one solid number there for the offense. So I apologize that it's not like last week it was this percentage and this week it's this percentage for how much help they're giving Caleb in the blocking game. But you're seeing it across the board that the tight ends and the running backs are all doing it just a little bit more. And when you have 5 players or 6 different players all doing something a little bit more, that's 6 times the impact of a little bit more, ends up making it a lot more in the grand scheme of this offense. So you can see it a lot going back on tape too, of tight end staying in, running back staying in. Sometimes it's just, most of the time it's just one extra blocker. It's not like those max protect shot plays where you have 2 receivers running routes and 3 extra guys back by the quarterback trying to block and just give him as much time as possible. It's not purely that, but it's the tight ends helping and certainly chipping as well, the running backs out of the backfield, and that helped this offensive line give Caleb a little bit more time and not have to be constantly, under duress here. It wasn't like it was a overall perfect performance by any means, and Caleb was still under pressure more than he should have been, but had his best game yet under pressure. 5 of 8 passing for 59 yards and a touchdown. A passer rating of 124.5 while under pressure was a huge improvement from last week to this week. And so I think having the tight ends and running backs be more of a part of that, because they're on the field more as well. You're just using more 12 and 13 personnel where those guys can chip before they release, as opposed to the wide receivers are never going to be able to chip and release in the passing game. But when you've got at least 2 tight ends and a running back on the field for 40% of your plays, it's a lot easier to still have 2 of those guys run out for routes and the running back can still help in and block, or you can have 2 of those guys chip and then run out in routes and have the running back into block. I mean, you have so many more varieties of how you can call protections. And okay, we've got 2 tight ends on the field, so if they're showing blitz on one side, we can just make sure that tight end stays in and let the other tight end run a route, or we can have the running back go help the other side then if the other tight end is going to stay in. Like, there's more variety there, as opposed to if it's just one running back, one tight end, you're limited on how you can assign those resources in the passing game and the pass blocking game for your quarterback. So I'm really curious to see if these trends continue against the Carolina Panthers, or if this was something they just felt like they had to do against the Rams, and then maybe they'll get back to more, 3 wide receiver stuff and spread them out more against other teams. We'll keep close eyes on Shane Waldron's offense here kind of throughout this whole process, each and every week here on the Locked On Bears podcast. But I also want to make sure we're keeping a good eye on this Chicago Bears defense as well, where the pass rush continues to be effective. Certainly the secondary has been generating turnovers at a great rate as well. And I want to look at what Matt Eberflus and Eric Washington did in this game to disrupt Matthew Stafford, and how that sort of bring us to this point over the course of the season where this Bears pass rush is coming from a lot of different places. And we can check into on, some of the development of young guys like Gervon Dexter on the interior, who leads your Chicago Bears in sacks at this point. So we'll look at the defensive side of the ball and some of the changes in progress they've made next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. Whether you're going to a Bears game, getting tickets for Bears-Rams this past weekend, or you're looking at your other favorite sporting teams, I guess neither the White Sox or the Cubs are in playoffs at this point, but any sporting events in your area, plus concerts, theater shows, comedians. I just went and saw Jim Jeffries the other day, I think last week, and I got my tickets on the Gametime app. I love it because with Gametime, you can see your view from your seat, so you know exactly what you're going to be getting with your ticket purchase before you buy those tickets and show up at the venue. And with Gametime, you can also turn on all-in pricing, so you don't get any added fees at the end of the checkout process, and you're going to know exactly how much your tickets will cost you. So that way you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. The Bears' offensive changes are always going to be the big focus as we wait for that side of the ball to try and catch up to what this defense is doing. But just like, after the games on Monday, I want to make sure we don't just ignore the defense every week and just spend 5 days straight talking about the offense and then get into the next game and talking for the offense about 5 days straight, after that one into the next game and just repeat this cycle. The defense is playing very well, and particularly the area of the defense we were worried about, the pass rush, has not been nearly as big of a problem or a concern as it looked like it might be on paper coming into this season. And that's been a credit to the players who have been playing very well, developing at a good pace, and also the coaching staff doing a lot to generate a pass rush schematically, and then the secondary covering well so the quarterback holds the ball longer so the pass rush can get home. It's a group effort there. But in particular, something we talked about a little bit on yesterday's podcast coming out of the game that, again, we could go back through the All-22 film and then also see how well the numbers align with what we were seeing with the eye test. How they were pressuring Matthew Stafford was interesting because Matt Eberflus has found this good mix of when and how and where to blitz with whom. And it looks a lot of different ways. They blitz Stafford more than usual, more than we typically see Matt Eberflus blitz. The blitz rate was about the same as what they did against C.J. Stroud, which was much higher than what they did against Anthony Richardson or Will Levis. So like weeks 1 and week 3, Bears didn't blitz a ton. They said, hey, neither of these quarterbacks is that great of a thrower. We don't need to blitz them to make them super uncomfortable. Stroud and Stafford, they said, wait a minute, these two quarterbacks are very good throwers. We need to make sure they're not just sitting in the pocket and picking us apart and getting super comfortable there. And so we saw the blitz rates be similar in those two games. But I think the way Matt Eberflus blitzed Stafford was different than the first 3 games. And the way that they folded in sim pressures was also interesting. That particularly in this defensive game plan against the Rams, so much of it was about Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards rushing from their linebacker spots and being able to line them up in different places and sometimes drop them into coverage, sometimes send them after the quarterback. But this was the week that they both pass rushed more this week, week 4 against the Rams, than any other game so far this season. Like when you look at the percentage of passing plays, like on plays where they're on the field and the offense is passing, how much are Edmonds and Edwards blitzing versus dropping back into coverage? Of course, the majority of the time in every game, they're dropping back into coverage. But this game was the highest percentage of plays where they're rushing the passer on passing plays. Both Edmonds and Edwards rushed the passer 7 times, and that worked out to be about 20% of the pass. I think exactly 20%. I think it was 35 passing plays for the Rams. They each pass rushed on 7 total plays. Now, sometimes they were both rushing. Sometimes it was just one. It just kind of worked out. It wasn't like every time it was both of them. Sometimes it was just Edwards. Sometimes it was just Edmonds. But it worked out that they both rushed the exact same number of times. It's not always exactly on the exact same plays. But they both rushed 20% of the time. They hadn't had a game where they rushed more than 10% of the time up to this point. So they were blitzing twice. Edmonds and Edwards specifically were blitzing in this game twice as much as any other game this season for either one of them. They were blitzing aggressively. We've seen Kyler Gordon be also kind of their go-to blitzer out of the slot. His blitzing numbers have kind of stayed pretty steady over these 4 games. It wasn't a lot more Kyler Gordon in this game, but what we saw less of was like the safeties coming down, Brisker and Byard. I think Brisker technically blitzed, I think twice, but one of them got called back for penalty, but had the big sack where he came unblocked off the edge on one of the blitzes. But that was pretty much it. The rest of it was linebackers. Edmonds, Edwards, and Sanborn blitzed a couple of times as well. And I think what that allows Matt Eberflus to do is, first of all, like maybe this is obvious, but you're not taking any of your best coverage players out of coverage. Like Edmonds and Edwards are very good in coverage, but cornerbacks and safeties are always going to be better coverage players than linebackers, just the nature of the positions they play. So when you're not having to blitz pass, secondary players as much, there's an advantage there in terms of the matchups you're still going to be able to maintain on the back end when you are blitzing. But then also I think you think about the linebacker pressure a lot of times, most of the time, right up the middle in front of the quarterback's face. Corners and safeties will usually kind of walk down to the edge and blitz from the outside. And those two can be a little bit easier to, I don't want to say predict, but sort of diagnose pre-snap. Like sometimes a cornerback will wait and not show any blitz and then go, but a lot of times there are different tells that you can kind of predict before any given play. Hey, it looks like that cornerback is probably going to blitz, and it's a little bit easier to slide over and pick it up. But with the linebackers, Eberflus would walk them both up to the line of scrimmage a lot and not always blitz them. It's easier to disguise a blitz with linebackers than it is with secondary players. You can show blitz a lot and only blitz some of the time. So the offensive line is always preparing for the possibility that they might blitz, but you're never sure exactly when and where they're going to come. It's also easier to replace a linebacker in coverage with a defensive lineman, something we mentioned briefly yesterday, that the Bears dropped defensive linemen back into coverage more in this game than in previous weeks. Darrell Taylor dropped back into coverage twice. Austin Booker dropped back into coverage. Montez Sweat dropped back into coverage. DeMarcus Walker dropped back into coverage. That's 5 different plays where a defensive lineman dropped back into coverage. You're never going to ask a defensive lineman to drop back into a deep coverage. It's always going to be something underneath, and it's either going to be right over the middle or right in the flat. And so, when you're blitzing a linebacker, a defensive end can just kind of drop back into that spot underneath over the middle. You're just trying to take away quick passes, not having to cover anybody downfield or anything quite like that. So I think it worked out nicely in this matchup to rely on the linebackers a little bit more. And it speaks to where how this Bears pass rush has come from so many different places over the course of this season. Like when you look at who has generated pressure for the Bears, 11 different players have gotten either a hurry, a hit, or a sack on the quarterback. Technically 6 different guys have gotten at least a half a sack on the quarterback, and 6 different guys have also gotten quarterback hits this season. And then 10 different guys have generated hurries over the course of the year here. So yes, Montez Sweat has the most pressures of any player on this Bears team with 11 so far this season. But Gervon Dexter has 9, Andrew Billings has 8, DeMarcus Walker has 7, Kyler Gordon has 5 pressures on 18 blitzes this season, all hurries. Doesn't have a sack just yet, but playing well. Darrell Taylor has 5, Booker has 2, Zach Pickens has 2, Sanborn has 2, Edmonds has 2, Brisker has 1, and Chris Williams has 1 as well. You're getting a lot of different guys involved in a lot of different ways in terms of overall pressures. The sack numbers are a little bit lower than what you might want. Gervon Dexter leads your way with 3 sacks so far. Very good of him to be able to get this sack production so early. 3 sacks in 4 games so far is exactly what you wanted. I think maybe we would expect more than 2 from Montez Sweat, but again, he's leading you in pressures and is generally winning a high percentage of his pass rushes. That's one of the key things to keep an eye on here. Sacks are a very low percentage of actual pass rushing plays, but when you look at pressures, that gets you a little bit more. And then win percentage tells you, okay, especially I really like PFF's win percentage stat as opposed to Next Gen Stats win percentage stat. They measure 2 different things. Next Gen Stats, I don't have to get in the weeds here. Next Gen Stats, the NFL's Next Gen Stats thing, calls it as a win if you get within 4 feet of the quarterback. No matter what happened on your play, if you just get within a GPS distance from the quarterback, they'll count that as a win. Whereas PFF's win percentage is, do you beat the blocker in front of you? Whether you get to the quarterback or not, did you win your pass rush rep? Not about the quarterback, not about the pressure, just you versus the blocker. If you won, that counts as a win in your win percentage. If you didn't get around your blocker, doesn't count as a win percentage. So DeMarcus Walker leads the Bears in PFF pass rush win percentage. 17.3% of his pass rushing plays, he beats the blocker. That's top 25 in the NFL. I actually don't have the number, the ranking in front of me. I know Andrew Billings is top 20 among defensive tackles in pass rush win percentage at 14%. Gervon Dexter leads the Bears in sacks, has the big plays, but his pass rush win percentage is just under 8.5. I think it ranked around 50th among defensive tackles. To put in perspective, Gervon Dexter's winning his pass rushes at about the same rate that Roy Robertson Harris is, former Chicago Bear. I assume still with the Jacksonville Jaguars, but still with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So, like, if you think about what Roy Robertson Harris was as a pass rusher, assume he's still around there. That's about what Gervon Dexter is doing on a win percentage basis. But he's making big plays for big sacks. Same for Darrell Taylor on the defensive line. He's got a couple of huge sacks this season and a couple of big quarterback hits that have led to big plays. He has the lowest pass rush win percentage of any edge rusher in the NFL. Or was it second lowest? It's like 113th or 114th out of 113 or 14 guys. Like, he's one of the lowest on a per snap basis. Darrell Taylor's not winning very often. But when he does win, it's a huge play. So you need those flashes from Taylor and you need those flashes from Dexter, but you also need the pressures from Billings and Walker and Sweat that hurry the quarterback, but aren't the hit and aren't the sack, but contribute to a quarterback being uncomfortable and contribute to a pass rush getting in his head over the course of the game. And that's where I think holistically you see how this pass rush has come together, with guys being able to take advantage of the big plays and guys being able to do the dirty work a little bit more, and combined for a solid enough unit that we were a little bit concerned about coming into this season. But the guys are developing, and we'll keep tabs on how the young Bears pass rushers keep growing over the course of this season right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL with Tyler Rowland in the morning, and then a second episode every day with Tony Wiggins in the afternoon. I'm co-hosting with Tyler Rowland on this Tuesday morning, Locked On NFL. We're talking about the two Monday night games with, it was the Lions and Seahawks for the late one, and the early one was Titans and Tyler Rowland, Dolphins. Titans, Dolphins, and then Lions, Seahawks. And then we also talked about which head coach is going to get fired first, Nick Sirianni or Doug Peterson. So lots of good NFL talk for you on the Locked On NFL podcast every day. Come back and make Locked On Bears your first listen each day. We'll have crossover Thursday with Locked On Panthers coming up this week as well. But each day, no matter what, you'll get another opportunity to bear down.